In this case, I'll get a web camera and then I can use this fancy microphone instead, which would be lovely. But until then, let's get on with chapter 12. I will speak as clearly as possible so it picks everything up. As usual, I'll do my best not to mumble too much, considering I have a ridiculous accent, and it can be hard to hear what I'm saying. Okay, this is chapter 12, The Other Side of Darkness. So, on the last episode of Dragon Ball Z, they were just crossing the river. Chapter 12. There was no time to rest on the other side of the river. We had made it past the North Korean soldiers, but Chinese patrols could still pick us up at any time and send us back across the border. Our guide told us to keep moving, so my mother and I followed him up the icy bank to a small, unlit shack. A bold, heavy-set man was waiting for us there. "Here, give me your clothes and put these on," he said. We could tell by his rough accent that he must be one of the many Chinese of Korean descent who lived in Changbai. In the dark, we took off our clothes and put on another set of cheap Chinese clothes. Now, if we were stopped, we might at least look like we belonged there. Our North Korean guide stayed with me while the bold broker pulled my mother around to the side of the building. Now, map again. Let me see if I can do this without losing my place, because I looked up Changbai the other day. It is quite literally. There's Hyesan. I don't know if this is all reversed. Changbai is just above it, just across the river. It is China, but it's obviously a number of North Koreans are there as well. In fact, if you look at it on Google Maps, it's called the Changbai Autonomous Korean Zone, which is interesting. "Don't worry," the guide told me. "Everything is okay." But it did not sound okay. I heard my mother pleading with this man. Then there were terrible noises I had never heard before. It wasn't until later that I found out what happened. The broker told my mother that he wanted to have sex with me. She had to think quickly. He couldn't know that I was her daughter, and he could not know that I was only 13. He might send us back to be captured by those border guards. So she explained to him I was too sick and that I had just had an operation and my stitches would tear. "I'll be gentle," he said. "No, you cannot," my mother cried. "What's it to you?" he said. "Why do you care about this girl?" "I'm her aunt," my mother said. "We weren't supposed to tell you." "What's going on here?" he said. "If you're going to be trouble, we'll just send you back to North Korea, and they'll arrest you." "We won't cause you any trouble," she said. "Take me instead." He pushed my mother down on the blanket in the dirt, one he had obviously used before, and raped her. A few minutes later, the broker reappeared around the building with my mother. Just then a car pulled up to the shack. All of us climbed in with the driver. My mother and I in the back seat, and we rode for a while along the river. I could sense something was badly wrong, but I still had no idea what my mother had done to protect me. "Uma, what happened?" I asked. I kept forgetting not to call her mother. "Nothing, don't worry," she said, but her voice was shaking. I was not used to traveling in a car. I soon began to feel sick to my stomach. My mother put my head in her lap and held my hands tightly, but when we rounded a bend in the river, she told me to look up. From the window, we could see the dark buildings on the North Korean side of the river. Look, Yeonmi, that may be the last you see of your hometown, my mother said. My heart jumped a little as we passed our apartment building. I knew my father was in there, waiting for us to come home. I swear I could see a flicker of light at the window, like a signal from my father to me. But my mother said no, it was my imagination. There was never a light. Our next stop was the broker's apartment in Jangbei. What's happening here? My mother asked the young North Korean guide. Just listen to these people and everything will be fine, he said. The bald broker's wife was ethnic Korean like himself, and paralyzed from the waist down. Her mother lived with them and took care of her. The broker's home had electricity, and now that he could see our faces clearly, he flew into a rage. These women aren't 18 and 28, he bellowed at the guide. My mother tried to stick to our story, and she was able to convince the broker that she was actually 34 instead of her true age of 41. But when he looked at me, he could tell I was just a child. The broker made a phone call and started arguing with someone in Korean. I could tell it was about money. The wife, who was sitting up in her bed watching everything, finally explained what was going on. If you want to stay in China, you'll have to be sold and get married, she told us. We were stunned. What did she mean? Sold? I could not imagine how one human could sell another. I thought people sell only dogs, chickens, or other animals, not people. And what did she mean? Get married? I could not believe what was happening. Oh, hello, chat. Hello. Wagwan. I haven't seen that word in a while. I'm not going to say, I can't say it. I sound like a fool when I say it. Hello, everyone. When we hesitated, the broker's wife lost her patience with us. Decide now, decide, she demanded. Get sold or go back. That's the only way it works. Ever since I had grabbed my mother's hands and refused to let go, a change had happened between us. From now on, I would be making the decisions. My mother looked at me and asked, "What do you want to do?" Without thinking, I said, "I want to eat something." We haven't had a bite of food all day, and everything else was so confusing and terrifying that my focus became very narrow. "Yes, Yeonmi, she said. But do you want to go back to North Korea?" I thought for a short time. If we were sold, I figured that at least we would all be in the same village, and we could plan our next move when we got there. And then we could find Eunmi, that's their sister, and we could have something to eat. "I want to stay in China," I said. "Good," the bald broker said. "Do you know anything about my older daughter Eunmi?" my mother asked. "She was supposed to go to China, and we haven't heard from her." The bald broker told us he had expected to receive 2 girls a few days ago, but they never showed up. He had even tried again the day before we arrived, but couldn't make the connection. As far as he knew, they were still in North Korea, but he assured us that the girls would be in China soon, that we could all meet in the village where the other defectors were living. "Okay," I said, "we agree." He made another call, and soon a very fat Chinese man and a skinny woman with a North Korean accent arrived. They sat down with the bold broker and negotiated our price right in front of us. The fat man, Ji Fang, was another mid-level broker along the chain of traffickers who would eventually sell us to our quote-unquote husbands. We learned that a mother with a young daughter would normally be sold together for a much lower rate than two healthy young women who could be sold separately. So the North Korean traffickers had lied to the bold broker, and now he was lying to this Chinese middleman, hiding the fact that we were mother and daughter, and trying to convince him that I really was 16 years old to get a higher price. Ji Fang kept looking at me and saying, "Come on, tell me your real age." There was no way I could convince him I was older, because I was so little. I admitted that I was really 13. "I knew it," Ji Fang said. Finally, they reached a deal. My mother, who had been sold by the North Koreans for 500 Chinese yuan, the equivalent of about 65 American dollars in 2007, was being bought by Ji Fang for the equivalent of $650. My original price was the equivalent of $260, and I was sold to Ji Fang for 15,000 yuan, or just under 2,000 American dollars. The price would go up each time we were sold along the chain. I will never forget the burning humiliation of listening to these negotiations, of being turned into a piece of merchandise in the space of a few hours. It was a feeling beyond anger. It's still hard to fathom why we went along with all of this, except that we were between fear and hope. We were numb, and our purpose was reduced to our immediate needs. Get away from the dangerous border. Get away from this terrible bold broker and his frightening wife. Get something to eat, and figure out the rest of it later. Once our prices were settled, the North Korean guide, Ji Fang, and the woman all left the apartment. Then, finally, my mother and I were given something to eat. I couldn't believe it when the mother-in-law set a bowl of rice and some spicy pickled cucumber in front of me. I had never seen cucumber in winter, and it was like a miracle to taste it now. Eating all that rice seemed impossible. In North Korea, I would have to share my food with others and always leave something in the bowl. At home, eating all of your food is rude and shameful, because you know that your host will eat what you have left. But here in China, there was so much rice that you were allowed to eat a whole bowl by yourself. And there was more food in the garbage can in this apartment than I might see in a week in Hyesan. Suddenly, I was very happy with my decision. At 5 o'clock in the morning, with heavy snow blowing in circles around the apartment building, a taxi arrived and parked around the corner. We went outside, and the bold broker told me to wait by the gate. Then he threw my mother to the ground and raped her right in front of me. Okay, like an animal, I saw such fear in her eyes, but there was nothing I could do except stand there and shiver, begging silently for it to end. That was my introduction to sex. Screw it, I wasn't going to smoke during this stream. Screw it, I'm having work on. What was a smoke 'em if you got 'em moment? Jesus Christ. When he had finished, the bold broker led us to the taxi and pushed us into the back seat. Both of us were shocked and speechless. There was another North Korean woman in her early 30s, already inside. She had just crossed the border too. Ji Fang's helper, whose name was Young Sun, sat in the front next to the driver. Young Sun explained to us that we were all going to another place before we were sold. My mother and I huddled together and tried to be calm. I was carsick most of the way, and very little was said as we drove through the Chinese countryside. At the end of the day, we finally stopped on the outskirts of what seemed to be a large city. My mother couldn't speak or read Chinese, but she had studied a little English in college. She saw a sign in both Chinese and Western characters that said we were in Changchun, the capital of the Jilin province, Jilin province, Jilin province. Already the air seemed different in China. In North Korea, we lived in a haze of dust and burning trash. But in China, the world seemed cleaner, and you could smell wonderful things cooking everywhere. Considering the air quality in China, as well, you've probably seen documentaries on, they have apps on their phones for whether it's worth wearing a mask when you're out, to help filter some of it. And yet, unless the south of China isn't as bad as the bigger cities, China's a very big place, so I suppose it goes to show you how bad the air quality must be in North Korea. Young Sun lived with Ji Fang, the fat broker, in a neighborhood of modest apartment buildings, all of which seemed very fancy to me. Now we've gotten to the point in the middle of the book where there's a bunch of black and white photos, so shall we? So first one, what's this? Yeonmi's parents at the zoo in Pyongyang. So mum and dad of the main character in a zoo in Pyongyang. There's an elephant behind them. So Pyongyang had at some point an elephant. There are two there. Let's see, we've got some of the kids. Top one up here is Yeonmi on her first birthday. Yeonmi at 100 days old, and Yeonmi age 2. So this is her at different ages of her life. Gives you an idea of the clothes, maybe even the weather as well. Here it's mild, but here it can be very cold. This is Yeonmi on the right, Aeonmi on the left, and Grandad in the middle. It does have that classic Grandad look about him. On the right, we've got kids. Yeonmi and Aeonmi in the top, sledding, ages 3 and 5, and Yeonmi in the snow at 3 underneath. I know these qualities are probably awful because of the fact that I'm streaming from a phone. Another snow day. Doesn't say their ages in that one. And let's see. Wow, you can see the date on that one. 9/9/1996. 3 and 5. Got the mother and father again, family photo, 1996, up there on the top. Dad looks kind of cool there, I think. Let's see, same again in the bottom, 2 kids, mother and father. The old me, 3 years old. This clothing reminds me of what I wore growing up, some sort of jumper with something. I had a Fred Flintstones jumper, things like that. I certainly don't think that they were official either. I mean, back in the early 90s, late 80s, copyright wasn't exactly about the biggest of things, and so you could get a Fred Flintstone jumper at the market. And it wouldn't necessarily be official merchandise, from the Disney store. So Two of them again in the snow. I guess North Korea gets its fair share of snow. Let's see, more family photos and Hye-san and the two kids in matching outfits underneath that. So there's the family again. And two kids. Now, the funny thing about wearing similar clothing with your children, I actually asked my mum why she did that, because she did that to us. It's not just something you do to twins. If you've got two children who are probably a year apart or 2 years apart, you tend to dress them in the same clothing. I actually asked my mum why she did that, and it turns out it's not because it looks cute or anything like that. It's actually a very logical answer, or at least from my mother's perspective, because her answer was, it means I only have to shop for one outfit. And I thought, well, hell, that makes a lot of sense, actually, because then you don't have to faff around picking different things. Let's see, we've got a group photo here. This is a family wedding in the countryside. Eunmi is on the third row, second from the left, and Eunmi is the second row left, apparently. Of course, if this photo is reversed, that probably doesn't help. But it gives you an idea. That's a wedding photo. You can see Pyongyang in the background there. There's Eunmi, 8 years old. That's one of the bigger government buildings, isn't it? I don't know if that's the building that's the big Kim Il-sung statue outside of, or a different angle of it. This would have been the 90s, so they would have been built by then, the big... I don't know if it's behind. There's a different... It looks like there's a different monument in the back. I must be mixing up with a different building. We've got the dad again before his arrest in the top. Two pictures of him before he was arrested. This is her dad who used to smuggle steel in order to make ends meet. Oh, and here we go. Post-arrest final photo. Eunmi and her mother took of her father before his death. More skinny, a little worse for wear. I don't know if you could see it's hard to tell with all of the sunglasses he's wore throughout his life. But this is the face of a man who's gone through the prison system and came out alive. Would have been subjected to hard labor. I can't remember how many years they said he was there. Well, spoiler alert, I suppose, but I mean, she wrote the book, so she probably got out, but here you are. Here they are in Seoul in 2015. So, spoiler alert, but you probably already came to the conclusion she got out, but still. That was a fun segue. Let me pick up from that previous sentence. Young Sun lived with Jifang, the fat broker, in a neighborhood of modest apartment buildings, all of which seemed very fancy to me. After she let us into their apartment, the first thing Young Sun asked us was, "What do you want to eat?" "Eggs," I said. "I want to eat eggs." I hadn't had more than a few bites of eggs since my father was arrested. And only then at New Year's. But Young Sun fried 5 whole eggs and gave them to me, while I sopped up the rich yolks with soft bread. My opinion of China improved even more. Later, we learned Young Sun's history. She had been some kind of smuggler in North Korea, where she got into debt and went broke. Jifang offered her a job if she would come to China and live with him. Now, instead of transporting the women he bought at the border, he sent her instead. That way she took all the risk. She was living with him like a wife, but they were not married. She had no rights, no identification papers, so she could be arrested at any time and be sent back to North Korea. virtually all defectors. Defector means you left the country. You defected from the regime, you left. You were done. Virtually all defectors in China live in constant fear. The men who manage to get across often hire themselves to farmers for slave wages. They don't dare complain, because all the farmer has to do is notify the police, and they'll be arrested and repatriated. The Chinese government doesn't want a flood of immigrants. Don't say it, Steve. Nor does it want to upset the leadership in Pyongyang. Not only is North Korea a trading partner, but it's a nuclear power perched right on its border, and an important buffer between China and the American presence in the south. Beijing refuses to grant refugee status to escapees from North Korea, instead labeling them illegal economic migrants and shipping them home. We didn't know any of this, of course, before we escaped. We thought we would be welcomed, and in some places we were, just not by the authorities. North Korean women were in demand in the rural areas of China because there were not enough Chinese women to go around. The government's population control strategy, this is China by the way, not North Korea, prohibited most couples from having more than one child. And in Chinese culture, a male child is more valued. Tragically, many female babies were aborted, or according to human rights groups, secretly killed at birth. China ended up with too many boys, and not enough women to marry them when they grew up. The ratio of male to female was especially unbalanced in rural areas, where many local young women were lured to the big cities for jobs and a better life. Men with physical or mental disabilities were particularly I just hit the entire table. Were particularly unlikely to find wives. In some areas, it is when a China baby is born in some areas, 1 year old. That's true. That's true in North Korea, I think, as well. I didn't know that was true in China, but I think when the baby is born, yeah, you're counted as being a year, as opposed to being 0. Yeah, I don't know if that's true in areas of China, but maybe because the culture blends, or it's an an Asian thing that's still in a. But I knew about it in North Korea. Oh, I've lost my place. Ah, yes. Men with physical or mental disabilities were particularly unlikely to find wives. But these men and their families created the market for North Korean slave brides. But brides weren't cheap, sometimes costing thousands of dollars. Didn't know it was in North Korea, yes. Oh, wow, there we go, in China too. I can't remember why. I don't know if there was a story for it, or it's something to do with the development and scientifically, I suppose you could say they're 9 months old when they're born, but I don't know if it's based on that, But yes, I do. Yeah, in North Korea, that's right. And when you're born, you're considered one. So I also think your age changes at a certain time in the year as well. So there's some places in North Korea where you can still only be 1 year old, but be considered 3 years old by the government. That was something this lady said in another interview that's on YouTube, but I can't remember which one. Okay, brides aren't cheap. North Korean slave brides aren't cheap, sometimes costing thousands of dollars or the equivalent of a year's earnings for a poor farmer. Of course, trafficking and slave marriages are illegal in China, and any children that result are not considered Chinese citizens. That means they cannot legally go to school, and without proper identification papers, can't find work until they get older. Everything about trafficking is inhuman, but it's still a big business in northeastern China. Madness, yeah. Yeah. After my mother and I and the other North Korean women had eaten and rested, Jifang, who had returned from Changbai separately, sat down with us to discuss what was going to happen next. He said another Chinese man would be coming by to take us to the countryside to match us with husbands. Can't we be sold together? My mother asked. This girl is really my daughter, not my niece. The fat broker didn't seem surprised to hear this. I'm sorry, but you and your daughter will have to be sold separately, he said. I paid a price for each of you. That's the only way I can get my money back. But my daughter can't get married, my mother said. She's only 13. Look, don't worry. I agree she's too young, Fang said. I'm a human being just like you. How could I sell a 13-year-old girl into marriage? He told us that if my mother agreed to be sold separately, he and young son would keep me with them and raise me until I was older. Then they would make a decision. Meanwhile, they would give my mother their contact number so she could always be in touch with me. My mother and I discussed it for a few minutes, and we agreed this was probably the best situation we could hope for. My mother said yes, she would be sold without me. Good, Shifang said. Now, what else do you want to eat? If you want a watermelon, I will buy you one tomorrow. The next morning, Jifang and Young Sun took me outside for my first real look at China. We walked by some shops, and I saw a mannequin for the first time in my life. I didn't know if it was a real person or a fake. Young Sun saw me staring and said, "That's just a doll, little one." I couldn't believe there were so many products in the stores. And there were restaurants and vendors selling all kinds of food. You could buy roasted corn on the street, and kebabs made out of kinds of fruit I'd never seen before. The only one I recognized was a strawberry, which I had seen in a school book. I want that one, I said, pointing at the fruit. They bought it for me, and I had my first taste of strawberry. I couldn't believe anything could taste so good. I could go on eating it forever. At first, I was concerned that these luxuries were too expensive, but my new friends told me not to worry about it. By now, I thought that China had to be the best place in the world. I had nearly forgotten the horrors of the past couple of days. My mind was filled with all the things I had to learn. I didn't like not understanding what people were saying around me, so I asked Young Sun to teach me a few words of Mandarin Chinese. The first were Ji Shi Shenme, which means, "What is this?" Everywhere I went, I pointed and asked, Ji Shenme? I'm so bad at Chinese. And Young Sun would give me the word. During that first walk, Young Sun had to explain traffic patterns to me, to keep me from walking into the road. We didn't have traffic lights in Hyesan, and there were very few cars anyway. In Pyongyang, I was too young to notice how it was done, but here you had to look up and watch for a signal before crossing, or you would get run over. Before long, it all became too overwhelming. I got dizzy seeing too many bright, different colors and people. The smell of gasoline and barbecue and car exhaust made me sick. I almost threw up in the street. The couple steered me back towards the apartment. When we arrived, they told me it was time to Say goodbye to my mother. Ji Fang was going to take her and the other woman to the next man to sell them. Suddenly, I snapped out of my dream. My mother was leaving, and I was going to be left with strangers. She tried to be brave for me, but I could see the resolve in her delicate, weary face. Be a good girl, she told me. Clean the house every day, and cook for these people, so that they can see the value of keeping you here. She showed me the fat broker's phone number on a piece of paper folded in her pocket. I will call you as soon as I can. Maybe Eunmi will be waiting for me when I get there. The night before, the brokers had given us soft Chinese white bread wrapped in plastic. It was so delicious that I decided to save half of mine to give to my mother to eat on her journey. But when I went to find it, the other North Korean woman had stolen it and eaten it herself. I had nothing to give to my mother as we hugged goodbye. I cried for a while after my mother was gone. So to cheer me up, Ji Fang and Young Sun took me out to a restaurant for dinner. It was the first time I had been to one since my trip to Pyongyang with my father. I had never seen disposable chopsticks before, and Ji Fang and Young Sun showed me how to separate them without breaking them. Then they ordered huge plates of pork and peppers and fried rice. I ate until my stomach refused to take any more. That night, Young Sun started teaching me some lessons in hygiene. I had never seen a toilet before, and she explained to me how to use it. Jesus. I thought you were supposed to perch on top of it, like the drop toilets we used in North Korea. She showed me how to wash my hands in a sink, and reminded me of the proper way to use a toothbrush and toothpaste. We had been so poor after my father was arrested that we used salt on our fingers to brush our teeth. She also told me how Chinese women used disposable pads during their menstrual periods. Back in North Korea, we just used a thin cloth that we had to wash. So I had been confined to the house for days every month. When she handed me the soft cottony pad wrapped in the thin plastic, I had no idea what to do with it. And it smelled nice, so I wanted to save it for some other purpose. But I thought the concept was great because it gave women much more freedom. The next day, she took me to a public bathhouse where women would take showers together in one room. I had seen showers in movies, but this was my first experience. It was so wonderful to feel the warm water coming down all over me. Young Sun scrubbed me from head to toe with real soap, and then she sprayed my head with something to kill the lice, and put my hair in a shower cap. Everybody in North Korea had lice. There was no way to get rid of them. So this treatment was a huge relief. A few hours later, we were finished with my transformation. I had clean hair and new clothes when I walked back to the apartment. When Ji Fang saw me, he smiled and said, "You look so shiny." Meanwhile, my mother and the North Korean woman who stole our bread had been sold to a Dalaoban, which means a big boss in the trafficking world, who went by the name of Hong Wei. Okay, so we've gone from Ji Fang to Hong Wei for the mother. There was a hierarchy of gangsters who specialized in North Korean bride trafficking, starting with the suppliers of the North Korean side of the border. Though wholesalers like the bold Korean-Chinese broker in Changbai and the couple in Changchun, kingpins like Hong Wei were at the top of the chain. and often had a network of other retail brokers working for them. Hong Wei was Han Chinese, the majority ethnic group in China, and he didn't speak a word of Korean. He was tall and in his early 30s, with a long face and a head full of hair. As the group travelled by bus and taxi deep into China, my mother had no idea where they were going. They stopped for the night at a dark, cold house in the country. An old man arrived and built a fire for them, and Hong Wei gestured to my mother that this was her husband. She had to sleep with him. But they had tricked her. It was just another broker. This ring of human traffickers always used the women before they were sold, including Hong Wei. My mother had no choice but to accept it. The next day, Hong Wei took my mother and the other North Korean women to a house in the country, outside the city of Jinzhou, about 300 miles northeast of Beijing. There, he cleaned them up and gave them some new clothes and cosmetics. The other woman was sold quickly, but my mother took much longer to find a suitable match. For the next several days, Hong Wei took her around to meet different men. She felt like a sack of potatoes in the market as they haggled over her price. The men said she was too skinny or too old, and her price kept coming down. One woman brought her mentally damaged son to buy her, but my mother refused. The brokers generally won't force women to accept matches, because they know they will just try to run away, which is bad for business. But if they are unreasonable, they will beat them or turn them over to the police to be sent back to North Korea. Finally, a family of farmers arrived with a son who was in his early 30s and still unmarried. My mother was sold to them for the equivalent of about 2,100 American dollars. That day, they brought her to live in the farmhouse in what seemed like the middle of nowhere. It was very humble, built of stone and plaster with a metal roof. It was early April, so the fields were furrowed and ready to be planted with corn and beans. My mother had only a few words of Chinese by now, but she was able to show her new husband that she wanted to use his phone to call me. At first, he refused, but after a few days of her crying and begging, he agreed. I was so happy to hear her when she called the fat broker's cell phone, and he turned it over to me. "Have you seen Eunmi?" I asked. "No, little daughter," she said. "I haven't seen anybody else from North Korea." I could tell by her voice that she was in terrible shape. She hadn't slept for days, and she couldn't figure out how to tell her new family that she needed some sleeping pills, the kind that she took home when she could afford them. Now, she was worried that she had agreed to leave me behind. She couldn't protect me anymore, and she hadn't found my sister. I tried to make her feel better, telling her not to worry because everything was fine, and she had a phone number where she could reach me anytime. That was the last time she was able to make a call for many weeks. The family locked up their cell phone, their money, even their food. She discovered that she was expected to be not just a wife to this Chinese farmer, but a slave to his whole family. She had to cook and clean and work in the fields. Time after time, she begged them to let her call her little daughter again. But no matter how much she cried, they didn't care. To them, she was like one of their farm animals, not a human being at all. Chapter 13. A Deal with the Devil. That was a big chapter, surprisingly. 45 minutes then. That feels like 2 chapters. Oh, I see. The next one is only 5-6 pages long, so we'll do chapter 13 as well. And then we'll end it there. Chapter 13, A Deal with the Devil. My mother had been gone for only 3 days when Xi Fang tried to rape me. Okay, we're off. We're hitting the ground running. Okay. His apartment was laid out with 2 bedrooms, separated by a hallway. I was sleeping by myself across the hall from Xi Fang and young Sun when he crawled into my bed in the dark. He smelled of alcohol, and his hands were rough when he grabbed me. I was so shocked that I started kicking him and struggling out of his grip. "Quiet," he whispered. "You'll wake her up." "If you don't let me go, I'll scream," I said. So he reluctantly left me alone and went back to his sleeping girlfriend. A couple of days later, he tried it again. This time he gave young Sun a lot of alcohol until she was passed out drunk. And then he came to my bedroom in the middle of the night. Again, I fought him off by kicking and screaming, and biting. I thought the only way to save myself was to act like a crazy person. I was so wild that he knew he would have to damage me badly, or even kill me to finish what he started. And then I would have no value, so he gave up. "Fine," he said, "but you can't stay in this house anymore. I'll sell you to a farmer." "All right," I said, "then sell me." A few days later, the man who had bought and sold my mother returned to take me away. Hong Wei was not his real name, but then he lied about everything. He told me he was 26, but he was actually 32 years old. He didn't know my real age, because the fat broker Xi Fang had told him I was 16. Nobody told the truth. I was trying to learn Chinese, but I could understand very little. And Hong Wei would communicate with me only in gestures. He took me to a Chinese restaurant for breakfast before our long journey, but I was so terrified that my hands were shaking. Every broker I had met in China had wanted to rape me, and I assumed this one was no different. Hong Wei kept gesturing for me to eat, but I couldn't. Even though I was still skinny and malnourished, I no longer had an appetite. Food was the reason I had come to China, and now the thought of it made me sick. We took a series of buses to Hong Wei's home territory, which stretched from the ancient city of Chaoyang to the bustling port of Jinzhou. Jinzhou. The buses made frequent stops, and at one of them, a vendor came on board to sell ice cream to the passengers. Hong Wei bought one for me. I hadn't eaten ice cream for a long time, and suddenly my appetite returned. I couldn't believe how something could be that delicious. I ate the whole thing, and even kept eating it in my mind when it was finished. That night we stayed at an inn in a small town outside of Jinzhou. Probably butchering the pronunciation. By the time we arrived that evening, I was again too upset to eat anything. So Hong Wei took me to a grocery store to buy some supplies. He told me he could tell me... Let's try that again. To buy some supplies. I could tell he wanted me to pick out things that I needed, but I had never seen such luxury items. I tried to tell him that I didn't need anything. He went ahead and selected things for me,
He picked out a fancy toothbrush, soap, and a pretty towel with embroidery. He saw that my skin was rough because of malnutrition and the cold, dry wind that blew in North Korea during the winters. So he bought me some moisturizing lotion. These things were so nice that I started to relax. I thought maybe he wasn't so bad after all. When we arrived at the inn, he showed me a kind of cell phone that I had never seen before. Not only could you talk with it, but it played music and had a camera that took pictures. Hongwei was showing me how it could play back videos when my mother suddenly popped up on the screen, waving and saying hello. I got so excited I couldn't believe it. Uma, Uma, I cried into the phone, grabbing it from his hands. I thought she was talking to me, so I tried to answer her. Hongwei was shocked. He had no idea that the woman he had just sold was my mother. Just like with me, he had been showing her the phone and took a video of her to demonstrate how it worked. When I realized that my mother was not talking to me, though, was not talking to me through the phone, my heart sank. But it was so good to see her face, and I thought this meant I would be seeing her in person soon. Later that night, Hongwei gestured to me that he was my husband, and so I must sleep with him, and then he tried to rape me. I'm starting to see why this is a short chapter. Again, I fought back, kicking and biting and screaming like a madwoman. I made so much noise that I'm sure it sounded like a murder was taking place in our room. So Hongwei gave up and went to sleep. I spent the night with my back to the wall, staring out with blood-red eyes, waiting for him to try again. The next morning, Hongwei tried to win me over with gifts and kindness. He took me to a store and bought me a pair of jeans, a sweater, and some running shoes. I had never seen those kind of shoes while I was secretly watching Chinese television in North Korea. It had been my dream to own a pair. Now that dream had come true, and I was still miserable. I'm not surprised, honestly, given the circumstances. I was beginning to realize that all the food in the world, all the running shoes, could not make me happy. The material things were worthless. I had lost my family. I wasn't loved. I wasn't free, and I wasn't safe. I was alive. But everything that made life worth living was gone. After a day in that small country town, Hongwei hired a taxi to take us to Jinzhou. He had rented a one-bedroom apartment in a 4-story building in an older neighborhood, near the zoo and a big park. To me, it seemed like a nice place to live. But I was terrified to be there with Hongwei. Once again, he tried to rape me. Once again, I fought him off like someone with nothing to lose. There was a demon inside me. I was so filled with fear and rage that even if he accidentally touched me in my sleep, I would start screaming and crying so hard that I couldn't stop. I would almost pass out. I think it really scared him. Hongwei realized that he couldn't take me by force unless he was willing to destroy me. So, Hongwei locked me in a room in the apartment for days or weeks. I have no idea how long. He opened the door only to bring me food, but still, I wouldn't change my mind. So, one day he decided to try showing me the reality of my situation. We traveled for 2 or 3 hours to a house in the countryside where Hongwei introduced me to a young, pregnant North Korean girl who lived with a Chinese man. Hongwei had to translate, just to make sure I understood him. If I refused to sleep with him, he was going to sell me off to a farmer. He wanted me to understand that he was offering me a much better alternative. Let him sell me, I said to the girl. Hong Wei shook his head in disbelief. He left me alone with her to think it over. She told me Hong Wei was expecting to get a high price for me because I was a virgin and obviously very young. I thought I could trust this girl because we were both North Koreans and she would take pity on me. Will you rescue me? I asked her. Can you help me escape and find my mother? She told her husband, and they agreed. We made a plan. While Hong Wei was not paying attention, I slipped out the back door, jumped over a fence, and ran to a tumble-down old house in the woods. The girl's Chinese mother-in-law soon joined me. A few hours later, a man arrived on a motorcycle to take me to a house deep in the mountains that belonged to one of their relatives. When I got there, I realized I had been tricked. The North Korean girl and her husband had stolen me from Hong Wei, and now they were trying to sell me themselves. They came to visit me in the mountains with another broker, and the girl told me, if you agree to sleep with this man, he will find you a rich young husband in a big city. You won't have to marry a farmer. I still refused. I told them I would die before I let that happen. The North Korean girl spent a week or so visiting me while she tried to persuade me to be sold. I had a lot of time to practice my Chinese during this time, and I picked it up quickly. Meanwhile, Hong Wei had called in some of his gangster friends to help find me. They rode their motorcycles all over the area, searching houses and sheds for my hiding place. The couple who stole me told Hong Wei that I had run away, but he didn't believe them. He tried, threatening them to get me back, but they stuck to their story. The Chinese man who had taken me even offered to help in the search. Through his connections in the trafficking world, Hong Wei eventually learned where I was being hidden. He approached the couple with a deal. Unless they cooperated with him, he would report them to the police, and the girl would be sent back to North Korea. But if they returned me unharmed, he would pay to buy me back. They took the deal. So Hong Wei bought me twice. I never learned the exact figure, but I know it was a lot more than the price he paid to buy me from Xifang. When another man on a motorcycle showed up on my mountain hiding place, I thought that I was finally being rescued. Instead, he took me into town where Hong Wei was waiting with a group of hard-looking men. Are you all right? Hong Wei asked. Did they hurt you? I shook my head no. I could understand more of what he said now, but I didn't want to speak to him. Usually when North Korean slave brides run away from their brokers, they are badly beaten or even killed. But Hong Wei didn't do that. He seemed so happy to have me back that he bought a big restaurant dinner for all the gangsters that had helped him in the search. We took a bus back to Jinzhou that night. I'll never be able to pronounce that correctly. As we walked from the bus station to the apartment, I was feeling very strong and calm, because I had already made the decision to kill myself instead of accepting this life. I had lost control of everything else, but this was the last choice I could make. I had cried every single day since I left North Korea. So much that I couldn't believe I had that many tears inside of me. But on the last day of my life, there would be no more crying. Just as I had given up, Hong Wei was filled with hope. He was not a religious man, but he sometimes prayed to the Buddha. The whole concept of religion was foreign to me. In North Korea, we worshipped only the Kim dictators, and our faith was in Juche, the doctrine of nationalistic self-determination created by Kim Il-sung. Yeah, the Juche, it's a North Korean word, I think, that means self-sustaining or self-determination. The doctrine of nationalistic self-determination created by Kim Il-sung. Practicing, Kim Il-sung was the first one in the 50s. When he died, it was Kim Jong-il, which is the one everybody knows from the 90s, who was he was in power when the famine kicked off. Because the Soviet Union collapsed in, what was it, 1991? And, you know, wasn't supplementing the North Korean economy anymore. And who have they got now? After Kim Jong-il, they now have Kim Jong-un. Kim Il-sung was the first one. He was the one that was the great leader, I'm pretty sure, during the Korean War. Practicing any other religions is strictly forbidden in North Korea and can get you killed. But in North Korea, fortune tellers are popular, although not officially sanctioned. And many people are superstitious about dates and numbers. So I understood Hongwei's extremely superstitious nature. He counted the steps as he walked to the apartment, and when he got there, he burned the same number of joss papers. It's fake money that is sent to the afterworld as an offering to ancestors. He hoped this would bring him luck with me, but it did not work. Jesus Christ. Once again, he tried to rape me. He pinned my arms to the bed. But I bit him and kicked him hard, and I got away. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed a knife, and I held it to my throat as I stood on the balcony. I was raving and screaming in Korean, "If you come near me, I'll jump." He couldn't understand what I was saying, but he could see in my eyes that I was ready to die. Hongwei spoke in a soothing voice, saying, "Beidong, beidong," which means "don't move" in Chinese. He used simple words that I could understand, and gestures to describe a bargain he had in mind. "You be my wife," he said. "Mama come, Papa come, sister come." Suddenly he had my attention. I slowly put down the knife. We sat down, and still using pantomime and simple words, he laid out his offer. If I would live with him as his Zhao Jifu, or little wife, meaning mistress, he would find my mother and buy her back. Then he would find my father in North Korea and pay for a broker to bring him to China. And he would help me find my sister. And if I didn't do this, he obviously wouldn't. He obviously couldn't sell me. So he would turn me into the Chinese police. And that means back to North Korea. I would never let this happen, of course. I couldn't really think logically at the time, but I recognized an opportunity to do something that was not just for me. I had thought only of myself for most of my life, but now I had a chance to choose my family over my own pride. I was willing to die to avoid the shame of being raped, but now I had another choice: to die selfishly or to save my family. But first I had to consider, could I trust this man? Everything I had been told since I left North Korea had been a lie. But something about the way Hongwei presented this bargain made me believe he was sincere. After all, he had been so determined to find me after I ran away. He knew that if he didn't keep his word, I would kill myself. And in his own barbaric way, he seemed to have genuine feelings towards me. In the end, there was no choice at all. For a long time, I thought of it as a business negotiation, not a rape. Only now, with the passage of time, can I accept what transpired in all its terrible dimensions. I was only 6 months past my 13th birthday, and small for my age, when Hong Wei pressed himself on top of me. I thought I would split in two. I was so scared, and the act was so painful and disgusting and violent that I thought it couldn't really be happening to me. After a while, I actually felt like I'd left my body and was sitting on the floor next to the bed and was watching myself, but it wasn't really me. Psychologists would describe that as a state of shock when you have that out of body. It's a what's it called? It's detachment as a detachment as a well, it's coping mechanism sounds like the wrong word, but I think that's the phrase. Essentially, to survive the act. Okay. As soon as Hong Wei was finished with me, I went to the bathroom and showered for what seemed like hours. I felt so dirty. I felt despair. I rubbed my skin until I bled, and that made me feel a little better. I discovered that physical pain helped me feel less pain inside. And for a while, pinching and scratching myself with a rough cloth became a habit. Sometimes it was the only way to escape the aching in my heart. That's something else I've read about or watched a documentary about recently, the psychology of it's obviously not everybody who gets a tattoo has some deep-seated trauma, but things like getting tattoos, things like cutting and things, it is what it is if you have some, what would you call it, mental, like even depression and stuff like that, these mental's not the word, is it? Psychological issues. The physical pain is a distraction from the from the emotional pain, which is obviously thought processes and stuff, and it's an interruption of the thought processes. It's a not just distraction. It's a, I can't remember the word for it, but it doesn't surprise me you'd see these behaviors in someone that would go through these kind of situations. When Hong Wei checked to see why the shower was running so long, he found me on the bathroom floor, limp and nearly drowned. He didn't say a word as he carried me back to bed, but I could see that tears were running down his face. I felt like I was losing my mind. The sexual act was so repulsive that I threw up every night. For a long time, I couldn't eat more than a few spoonfuls of rice in a day. Eventually, I became numb. This is a shock and detachment again. And Hong Wei thought I was recovering, but I was just going through the motions of being alive while watching myself from a distance. Like I was playing a role in a movie that never seemed to end. All that was left inside me was a smoldering hatred for this man. I fantasized about killing him in his sleep and running away. But where would I go now? And who else could save my family? We'll find your mother soon, Hong Wei told me one morning. But there's more to this deal. You will need to help me with my business. I had been in China for just 2 months when I began working for Hong Wei. He brought 2 North Korean girls to stay in the apartment, and I talked to them, and I was able to translate a little. I cleaned them up, just as young son had done for me, picked out clothes and makeup for them, and gave them lessons in hygiene. Unlike my mother and me, these girls had known they would be sold in China when they had escaped. They didn't care. They said it was better than dying in North Korea. Hongwei brought me with him to help sell these women in the countryside. After that business was finished, we returned to the village where he had sold my mother, and I met with her Chinese husband. I spoke enough Chinese by now that I was able to tell him that I wanted to buy my mother back. We negotiated a price. It was my first real business transaction. Hongwei paid a little more than 2,000 American dollars to buy her back for me. I was secretly pleased he lost money on the deal. A few days later, we met the family in a secret location in the countryside to make the exchange. It was June, and the grass was high. My mother saw me from far away and came running down a dirt lane to hug me. She had no idea what had happened to me, or that I was coming to get her. One time she had managed to sneak a call to the fat broker Jifang in Changchun, but all he could tell her was that I was gone. We were so happy to see each other that we couldn't stop crying from joy. It was the first time I had smiled or even felt alive in many, many weeks. Out of habit, my mother pulled me up on her back for a piggyback ride, just like when I was a baby. Let me see how much my little puppy grew while I was gone, she said. But I was not a little puppy anymore. She later told me that she had hardly recognized me in my makeup and new clothes. I didn't recognize me either. I no longer looked like a child. And everything that was childlike inside me was gone. It was as if the blood had dried in my veins and I'd become another person. I didn't have pity for anyone, including the girls I helped sell, including myself. My only purpose now was to bring my family together again. There was no word of my sister. Hongwei told us that he had asked the other brokers if they knew what had happened to her. But he learned nothing. It was a disappointment. But I still had to hope that he could use his network to find her, and soon we would be seeing my father again. My mother left that terrible farm without looking back. The three of us returned to Jinzhou together. I'm personally looking forward to them moving out of this town so I don't have to pronounce it again. I still hated Hongwei, but I learned to live with him. He was sometimes very harsh with me in the beginning, but he softened with time. I think he grew to respect me, trust me, and in his own way love me. His life had never been easy. Hongwei was born on a farm west of Chaoyang, an ancient city of Buddhist temples, parks, skyscrapers, and street gangs. When he was 12 or 13, same age as our protagonist, he ran away to the city and joined a gang that controlled a string of karaoke clubs. These weren't the kind of friendly sing-along bars you might find in Seoul or other cities. Seoul's the capital of South Korea, or other cities. They were places where women provided more entertainment than just serving drinks. Hongwei never had a higher education, but he could read and write, and was very smart. By 15, he was the head of his gang with his own karaoke empire. He used his connections to get into a lot of different businesses, such as restaurants and real estate development. About 2 years before I escaped from North Korea, he branched out into human trafficking for a while. That's where the big money was. In Chaoyang, Hongwei had a Chinese wife and 2 children, a son and a daughter. The daughter, I later learned, was only a year younger than I was. After Hongwei bought back my mother, she told him my true age was 13, not 16. I had never bothered telling him my age because I didn't believe it would matter. But he seemed shocked. I never would have slept with her if I'd known she was so young, he said. I don't know if that was true. But after that, he began treating me a little more gently. And I almost started seeing him as a human being. But I still expected him to live up to all of his promises, including rescuing my father from North Korea. Hongwei had contacts in Chiangbai, including some women whose business it was to run errands back and forth across the river. They were hired to transfer money to North Koreans whose relatives on the outside wanted to help them. They also smuggled in Chinese cell phones so families that were separated could stay in contact. This was very dangerous, but it could be arranged for the right price. In August, Hongwei hired one of these brokers to find my father. Next up will be Chapter 14, A Birthday Gift. But I'm going to leave it there because that was quite a lot of bad things that happened. So you might want to let that last chapter sink in a bit. But there we are. That's 2 more chapters. We're now on 14. I think it's 14 of 21, so we're getting somewhere. And it's certainly easing up. Alright, I'll leave it there. That's right, I don't know how to turn this off, do I? Because I'm a boomer. Okay. Take care, everybody. We'll do the next, probably the next 2 chapters next time. Goodbye.